In the late 1970s, the Himalayas were as wild as they are today, but for the government of Nepal, they presented a specific administrative challenge. Much of this vast, towering landscape had never been officially surveyed or named for the state's records. Officially mapping the world's highest terrain is a logistical nightmare. It required coordinating high-altitude surveying teams and reconciling local naming traditions with national records to create a definitive map of the country. To lead this effort, the government appointed Dr. Harka Gurung. He headed the committee tasked with literally defining the physical boundaries and identity of Nepal's mountain peaks. As a physical geographer and the chief advisor to the Nepal Mountaineering Association, Gurung was uniquely qualified to oversee this project. He understood these elevations not just as lines on a map, but as a defining characteristic of the country. Defining the physical map of Nepal was a monumental task, but it represented only one half of the work Gurung would eventually perform for the nation. Gurung's academic career provided him with an elite international perspective. He served as a demonstrator at the University of Edinburgh and a research fellow in London, building a reputation within global academia. Upon his return to Nepal, he moved quickly into the upper echelons of government. He held powerful positions as the Minister of State for Education and the Minister of State for Tourism. Between 1968 and 1975, he served as the vice chairperson of the National Planning Commission. This role placed him at the absolute center of Nepal's state development and power. Yet, from this ultimate insider position, Gurung saw a structural flaw in the country's development. While the state was successfully mapping its physical mountains, its social policies were failing to account for its people. He realized that a nation's physical infrastructure remains incomplete if its social infrastructure actively excludes its own citizens. Gurung eventually transitioned away from government to pursue independent research. He began consulting for international organizations and directed the Asia-Pacific Development Center. Nepal's government enforced a rigid one-religion, one-language policy, a top-down effort to flatten diverse cultures into a single national identity. Gurung fiercely disagreed, openly challenging the ingrained caste classifications the state used to control society. As a geographer, he saw a stark contrast between the government's uniform vision and the complex, diverse reality on the ground. He believed the state's maps should reflect the actual diversity of its inhabitants. Gurung used his elite status to challenge the very systems that had elevated him, arguing that systemic inequality was holding the nation back. He began focusing on what he called human geography. He traveled to overlooked rural regions to document the lives of the people living far from the capital's influence. This resulted in a massive body of writing. In this excerpt, titles like Faces of Nepal catalog the country's varied demographics. Further down, the text highlights his focus on nationalism and Janajati indigenous people, turning a quiet struggle into a national debate. These were the faces of the communities Gurung championed. He demanded their cultural identities be officially recognized as an integral part of the nation's map. By providing a detailed map of who the Janajati were and where they lived, Gurung's research allowed these communities to use the state's own language of data and geography to argue for their inclusion and rights. In 2006, a helicopter carrying Dr. Gurung crashed in the village of Phale in the Taplajung district after being caught in severe mountain weather. Dr. Gurung and 23 others were killed in the accident. The group was returning from a conservation meeting. Even in his final moments, Gurung was working to protect the physical landscape that he had spent his life mapping. The news of the crash reached Kathmandu and the rural hills simultaneously. It stalled key conservation efforts and silenced a central voice in the national conversation regarding social identity. The true measure of his impact was visible in the aftermath. People from completely different sectors of society, from government officials to rural farmers, came together to mourn his loss. The memorials created in his honor reflect his wide influence. The arts community dedicated the 2011 Kathmandu International Mountain Film Festival to his memory. There were grassroots tributes as well, including a memorial football tournament organized by Lamjan SC. In Pokhara, the 3-hectare Lali Garoons Eco Park was established. It serves as a permanent site for environmental conservation, dedicated to Gurung and those who died with him. These diverse memorials connect back to Gurung's dual life. He was a mapper of physical mountains who never lost sight of the people living among them. Dr. Harka Gurung demonstrated that nation-building is a dual process. It requires naming the peaks of the land and actively recognizing the identities of the people who make that land a home.